or respect for the rule of law. He's focused on a nominee's perceived loyalty to him and his agenda, and a willingness to rule in favor of him and his administration. When we consider the president's priorities and Ms. Hermendorfer's record, it's easy to understand why the president nominated her to serve on the Sixth Circuit. At the Office of Tennessee Attorney General, Ms. Hermendorfer leads the Strategic Litigation Unit. Why is that significant? She's not just defending state laws in Tennessee. She's turned the Attorney General's office into an advocacy arm for the Trump agenda. She's argued in support of President Trump's unconstitutional executive order that purports to end birthright citizenship. This executive order has been blocked by every judge who's considered it. One judge, appointed by President Ronald Reagan, I might add, said, and I quote, "I've been on the bench for over 4 decades. I can't remember another case where the question presented was as clear as this one. This is a blatantly unconstitutional order." End of quote. And yet Ms. Hermendorfer signed amicus briefs in support of that and supported the president's unlawful efforts to fire inspectors general and heads of independent agencies. Her record makes it clear that if confirmed, she will continue to enable rather than check an administration that has repeatedly exceeded its authority. Ms. Hermendorfer also refuses to acknowledge that President Trump lost the 2020 election. Let me repeat that. This nominee, who seeks a lifetime appointment to the federal bench, would ask the basic question as to whether Donald Trump won or lost the 2020 election, gave the stock answer. She refuses to acknowledge that Donald Trump lost. In response to this simple question, did President Trump lose the 2020 election? All she could say was, quote, "President Biden was certified as the winner of the 2020 presidential election and served as the 46th president of the United States," end of quote. This is the standard response from this administration's nominees seeking positions on the federal bench. It is an embarrassing genuflection before the big lie. The question of who won the 2020 election is not a matter of political opinion. It's a matter of historical fact. The overwhelming majority of my Republican colleagues have correctly recognized that reality, and we have a right to expect nominees to acknowledge such historic realities as well. Both President Trump's nominees, including Ms. Hermendorfer, have been afraid to admit he lost the 2020 election. Why are they afraid of it? It's a fact. They're afraid because it'll make him angry. He may dump their nominations because of the answer to that question. The fact that she's willing to condone President Trump's false claims further demonstrates a level of partisanship and deference to this president that is unacceptable for someone seeking a lifetime position on the federal bench. And just in case her political leanings aren't clear enough from her record, Ms. Hermendorfer also has strong ties to a range of right-wing organizations. They include the fabled Federalist Society and the Tenio Network. Tenio Network is a new conservative group funded by Leonard Leo and his affiliated organizations. You may have heard the name Leonard Leo recently when President Trump called Mr. Leo a sleazebag, and I quote. Membership in such organizations has been a litmus test for years for Republican nominees. It's the secret handshake, my friends. If you belong to the Federalist Society or now this Tenio Network, you're in. It means that a nominee will use the Republican playbook for deciding important federal cases. How does it work? You claim to be neutral, but in fact you contort history and overturn precedents to reach the Republican preferred outcome. Ms. Hermendorfer has followed this playbook to a T in the Tennessee Attorney General's office. She's opposed LGBTQ rights and reproductive rights, as well as environmental and anti-discrimination policies that protect the most vulnerable in America. I believe we need judges on the bench who will follow the law and the Constitution, not politicians in robes who rule in favor of the president and wealthy special interests. Finally, I'd like to note that Ms. Hermendorfer's academic record, though impressive, and her legal record, though extreme, is short. She graduated from law school in 2015, has fewer than 10 years legal experience, and outside of her clerkships, she's only practiced law for 6 years, and she's seeking a lifetime appointment to a circuit court, one of the highest in the land. She's never served as sole or chief counsel in any case, tried to verdict, judgment, or final decision. That is a shocking lack of experience for someone nominated for a lifetime position. She'll be watching trials for the first time as a judge. Unfortunately, this kind of experience is common among President Trump's judicial nominees. Make no mistake, experience is still important. Robust litigation experience ensures that judicial nominees will be equipped to fulfill their duties. As an appellate judge, she's going to be standing in judgment of many trial courts. She has limited experience in that field. Ms. Hermendorfer is the first judicial nominee we've considered this Congress. She won't be the last. In every instance, we must carefully examine the nominee's record as we consider them for a lifetime appointment. After carefully reviewing her record, I have serious concerns. I think my colleagues, if they look at her honestly, will as well. I urge them to join me in opposing her nomination. And now, Madam President, I ask the following statement be placed in a separate part in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. Madam President, I remember 9/11 very well. I was in this building, in a meeting with Senator Daschle just down the hall, and we heard news that a plane had struck a building in New York. By the time I made it to the meeting, it turned out there was a second plane that had done the same. 9/11 was clearly no accident. It was a terrorist act. As a result of that terrorist act, we made decisions as a nation on a bipartisan basis. One of the most bipartisan decisions we made was what to do with those who were responsible, Osama bin Laden and others. There was no doubt in my mind that we had to answer what they did with force, no doubt whatsoever. I'm not inclined to that conclusion on an ordinary basis, but I saw no other alternative but to send the world a message that no one could kill so many innocent Americans and not be held personally responsible. So there was a vote on the floor not for the invasion of Iraq, but for the invasion of Afghanistan to go after the terrorists, Osama bin Laden and his terrorist group. I voted for it. Every senator, both political parties, voted for it. The same thing was true in the House with only one exception. It was a decision we made to get involved in Afghanistan, and as reluctant as I was to see us get into war, I felt we had no choice whatsoever than to make that clear. And so we went engaged in that battle for one of the longest wars in our history. Eventually, under President Obama, we found Osama bin Laden and removed him from this earth, and many of his followers as well. But we paid a price as well. The men and women of the United States stood behind Congress's decision, enlisted in our services, and risked their lives in combat in Afghanistan. It was a terrible assignment, but they did it honorably and they did it effectively. One of the keys to their success in eliminating Osama bin Laden and many of his followers was the support of some Afghan people who risked their own lives to step up and help American soldiers. Day in and day out, these men and women joined our forces trying to put an end to the terrorism we knew of 9/11. Some of those, at the end of the conflict, some of those Afghans who risked their lives to help American soldiers came to the United States. And they were given what is known as temporary protected status. Temporary protected status, meaning they could stay in this country until the dangers in their home country had abated. TPS is a temporary designation allowing certain foreign nationals from countries experiencing turmoil to remain here without fear of being deported back to Afghanistan in this case. TPS was first designated for Afghans under the Biden administration in 2022, after we withdrew from Afghanistan, marking the end of America's longest war. For over 2 decades, tens of thousands of Afghan civilians worked alongside our military and diplomats. Make no mistake, they were risking their lives to help us and to face the possibility of retribution in their own country. I saw firsthand during our visit to Afghanistan some years ago just how these Afghans were making that courageous sacrifice. And the lives of their families, of course, were also in danger because of it. In return, we promised to the Afghans who risked their lives to help our troops that we would keep them safe from retaliation. And we opened our arms to welcome others similarly fleeing brutal conditions under the Taliban. In fact, Afghanistan today also faces the horrors of administration which is not delivered for their people. Record malnutrition, shortages of basic medicine, horrible repression of women and girls, and instability that threatens the entire region. Listen to this carefully. The State Department, our State Department, has put out a notice that Americans should not travel to Afghanistan because it's too dangerous. So why? Why are we facing a situation where this Trump administration is going to eliminate temporary protected status for the Afghans in the United States, including those who risk their lives to help our troops? Why would we send them back to a country so dangerous we warn Americans not to visit? We're also planning on closing, according to President Trump, the very office at the Department of State that protects these vulnerable Afghans here in the United States. Now, with the lifting of this TPS designation, these Afghans already legally in the United States, including some who risk their lives to help us, may face detention and deportation, returning to the horrific conditions in their homeland. I urge the President in the strongest terms to reconsider this. It is not just the fate of these Afghans, but it is the reputation of the United States. God forbid we're ever in another conflict in some country and turn to the local population to stand by us and risk their lives to help us. And when they agree, turn our backs on them again. That is not what a great nation does. I think most Americans feel particularly that Afghans who risk their lives to help our troops deserve better than to be forced to return to the danger of Afghanistan. This decision is a sad one for America. I think we're better than this, and I'm sorry that the Afghans who risk their lives to help our troops are now being abandoned by the Trump administration. Madam President, I yield the floor.